So we are, we titled the shir this evening, the concept of compromise. There are a number of, I think, different angles in the parsha, which we can look at on this notion of making a compromise, how that works. And really the starting point is a Gemara in Sanhedrin, and you'll see why. The Gemara discusses Yehuda and the perspective of what Yehuda does in terms of the compromise that he achieves in the beginning of the parsha, towards the beginning of the parsha, right? So let's just find this. Yeah. So, okay. So just so what the Gemara is going on. Let's just find the pasuk. 1 second. What the Gemara is going on is the when Yehuda says "Ma bet sakinar gesachinu," which is 1 second. Yeah. Yeah, pasuk chavov. So parak lamed zayin pasuk chavov. Vayem Yehuda lechov ma bet sakinar gesachinu v'chisinu estoma. What are we going to gain by killing our brother? V'chisinu estoma, we cover his blood. And the word betza, if you look at the Targum Onkelos says, "Va'amar Yehuda lachoi." Yehuda said to his brothers, "Ma momo nishani lona." What money are we going to gain? What monetary benefit will there be? Through killing our brother and covering his blood. Very important to always understand that the Targum, although Targum literally means a translation, Targum also often a parish as well, explanation, as a commentary. This is a good example, right? So the translation of Betza is, why is it, what worth is there? But there's a specific energy on monetary benefit, financial gain. So you heard this saying, what financial gain are we going to gain by killing him? We may as well sell him, okay? So on that pasuk, the Gemara says, or in Sanhedrin, the Vav Amud Beis, the Gemara there discusses the question, and the sugya there is talking about the concept of compromise in din, and when it's appropriate or not appropriate to make such a to make a pshara, to make a compromise, and that's the sugya of the Gemara. That's what the Gemara is talking about over there. And the Gemara brings a number of different examples and cases and scenarios. Rabbi Meir Omer, that lo nema boitzea ela keneged Yehuda. So the Gemara is going on a pasuk. The pasuk is boitzea berech nietz Hashem. The idea of someone who's making the way what this pasuk is meant is understood to mean as that someone who is boitzea, and we'll see what that means in this context and whether Rameh understands it in a second, is effectively ending up cursing, so to speak, Hashem even. I mean, the classic example that the Gemara uses to understand how it can be that a boitzea berech nietz Hashem, the previous opinion in the Gemara is Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says this pasuk means someone who steals something, let's say flour, and he bakes it and he takes challah. So you steal some flour, you bake bread, and you take challah. In part of the process, you take challah. Okay, what bracha are you supposed to make on that? So on that, the Gemara says, "Ein zeh mevarech ela menaitz." That's not making a bracha, that's cursing, because the whole thing has come through an avera. You stole in order to facilitate it, right? And that the Gemara says that boitzea berech nietz Hashem, someone who steals and then makes the bracha, is really cursing Hashem. Rameh says this pasuk, that pasuk of boitzea is referring to Yehuda. Lo nema boitzea lo keneged Yehuda. Shneimar, the pasuk says, by Yoma Yehuda al Echov, Yehuda said to his brothers, what are we going to gain for killing our brother? That's what that pasuk is referring to, and it's obviously very negative. Anyone who praises, anyone who blesses Yehuda for doing so, that person is actually cursing, so to speak, cursing Hashem. And that's what the pasuk is referring to, according to Rabbi Meir, when it says that if you are berech the boitzea, you praise the one who compromised. Yehuda's compromise. You understand? Yehuda's compromise. What's the compromise? The compromise is that we're not going to kill him, but we're not going to give him back, and instead we're going to sell him, right? If you praise that compromised position of Yehuda, yeah, that's the wrong thing to do. It's a terrible thing to do. You're essentially, that leads to that so to speak is cursing. Hashem is a terrible thing to do. Now Rashi there says in the Gemara that Keneged Yud says Rashi Shahaylo Lomar Nachzirenu La'avinu Acharei Shoydvar Nishmoin La'achiv. What he should have said is, since he was in the position of authority, okay, he wasn't clearly in the position of authority. All right, so he could have been the one. He could have said, "Let's give him back." Okay, that's what he should have said. His brothers would have heard, they would have listened. Whatever he would have said, they would have listened. And therefore, that's why Yehuda is criticized. That's how Rashi understands why it is that Yehuda is criticized. So in other words, what's happening here is that the reason why he is effectively blaspheming, and the person who praises Yehuda is because Yehuda had this influence. He had the possibility of achieving a far better outcome, right? Had he insisted that Yosef be set free, that would have happened. And all the grief would have been spared, right? And the reality is that that when it comes to, and there are others who say that the pshat is like this, that why is he faulted for being a compromiser? Because he saw which way it was going. He saw that they accept his suggestion for a sale. So he realizes he's got the authority over them. So he shouldn't have stopped there. You know, if it was the case indeed pardon?
They all wanted to get rid of him, so you ought to say that was selling to the Egyptians.
No, but the point is that once he sees that they agree to that, okay, once he sees, because it says, I mean, Rashi actually picks up on this as well. Rashi says, "Vayishma'u echov," right? When he says, "L'chuvinim kreinu leishma'elim," let's go and sell him. Rashi says, right? You look at Rashi, the kabilu minei, they accepted it. That's what it means. The shmir here is stronger than listening. Vayishma'u echov, they accepted it. So he should have gone further. He should have now sent him home. So that's why he's criticized. Okay, that's how Rashi understands. That's how Rashi understands it. That was the criticism, and that's why he's criticized for doing so. But there is an exact opposite explanation in this Gemara, which is fascinating. Okay, and that is brought by the Marsha. The Marsha says on that Gemara in Sanhedrin, and I realize this is slightly differently to what we normally do in terms of going through these Purushim, but you'll see why this is very, very. It's a really, really vital point in understanding two different approaches towards understanding the whole of the beginning of Parshas Vayeshev. So
why did you do this back? They both seem to be on the same side, right? They want to say.
Yeah. Reuven is a very interesting. The whole perspective of Reuven is different to all the brothers the whole way through. Reuven twice is this, and later on in Miketz as well. He's the one who says he's going to do something, and on his behalf. Some of Farshim explain that Reuven has a different perspective on his. Reuven reacts in a different way because of his own experiences. The Chazal talk about this as well. Because what happened in last week's parsha, where Reuven moved his father's bed. So he's gone through this whole. That informs. He's addressed his own. Sort of things that have happened to him, and that's affected what Reuven does as well. So I think Reuven is a slightly different category to what Yehuda is doing, and each of them needs there are different ways of explaining all the different perspectives. Let me just tell you what the Maharsha says here. So he says, he brings there's much more to the Maharsha, but he says, without this, if it weren't for the explanation of theirs, for example, like presumably going on Rashi or whatever, he says, we could have explained it as follows. It's coming to praise. It's coming to praise Yehuda. And he says that and here the word mevorich in the Gemara, because the word mevorich can actually mean to scorn, if you like. It can mean that. It can be the opposite of what it really means. Okay. There is a pasuk where you find the word bracha is used as a euphemism. It's a curse. Exactly. Well, yeah. Exactly. So what it's saying is, Es Yehuda Megalfe Azush Shama Mabetz Kinara Gmachar B'Mama and B'Letzul Aviv Ain't Elamanite Hashem. Anyone who criticizes, anyone who curses Yehuda, who criticizes him for suggesting the sale, such a person is Manait Hashem. It's blaspheming. She Yehuda Kavanosu L'Shem Shemayim Hoya, because Yehuda was entirely L'Shem Shemayim. Because he thought they're not going to listen to me. To return him back. They're not going to do it, which is exactly what you were saying, Jeremy. They're not going to give him. They're not going to listen to me, right? Okay, then he goes and says something else. But the point is the Maharsha says, if not for the explanations, not for the commentary of the Rishonim, he's obviously deferring to, like Rashi learns that it's a criticism of Yehuda. He would have said that what the Gemara is saying here is the opposite. The Gemara is saying that someone who Rameh is saying. Someone who curses and tells off, if you like, criticizes Yehuda for suggesting the sale, right, is wrong. Why? Because he was completely ashamed Shemayim. Yehuda knows that anything else would have been rejected by the brothers. And what does he do? In the circumstances, he makes a compromise. And that compromise is the best possible outcome he judges that he can get in this current situation. And therefore, that is a praiseworthy position because he did the best he could do. So it's fascinating. You have this Gemara, which can be read either way. There's no, if you look, the words again are, the word Botzeh refers to Yehuda, as it says, what is it? Mabetza. What do we again? That word mabetza. What worth will there be when we kill our brother? The cholam avoriches Yehuda says the Mashal. That means anyone who curses Yehuda. It's a euphemism, right? Harei menoi. That person is blaspheming Hashem. So what you see from here, J.J. Schechter points this out, is the two opposite perspectives on the notion of making a compromise. Sometimes you can look at a situation of compromise and say. And that's Rashi's explanation that you didn't go far enough. On the contrary, you settled for a compromise when you could have achieved everything. What a chaval! What a shame! If only you'd realized you had them in your hand, the brothers. So at that moment, you should have said, right, okay, you've agreed to sell him. Actually, let's give him back to his father, and everything would have been averted. On the other perspective, you can say sometimes people make a compromise, and although it looks like, oh, chaval, why did you make a compromise? Why did you settle for that? You should have gone for the you should have gone for gold. You should have got the maximum outcome. But the person knows that's the maximum they can do. That's the best they can do in this situation. And the example he gives is the Gemara in Gittin. What happens when, famously, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, leaves the city that's being besieged. Yerushalayim is being besieged by Vespasian. Okay, and he manages to get out. And some criticizes him, says the Gemara, because what did he ask for? Ten li Yavna v'chachomel. Give me Yavna and its scholars. Why didn't he ask for Yerushalayim? Why didn't he ask him? Remember the story, right? He gave him this nevuah that he would was that nevuah, but he said you will be the next emperor. And then a man came running and said Vespasian is becoming the emperor, right? So he says, wow, you because of this, I'm going to give you whatever you ask for. So why didn't he ask for Yerushalayim? Go away, leave us alone, leave the Beis Hamikdash. And the answer is because he knew that he'd never get that. He would never get that. Never he compromised. He settled for the maximum he thought he could achieve in the circumstances. This is a very, very important idea because we face this all the time in life. These scenarios where we think, what is the best possible outcome I can achieve in this circumstance? And that is the same dilemma which faces Yehuda, at least according to the way the Maharsha understands the Gemara here. There is a third explanation, which of the actions of Yehuda, and that is brought in the Meshech Chochmah.
Sorry, what's the second?
Sorry, no, the first is Rashi, the second is the Maharsha. So Rashi understands it as again, going with that Gemara, right? Rashi understands it as it's an entirely criticism of Yehuda. You had them in your hand. You could have and should have sent him back to your father. So Yehuda is not to be praised at all. The second is the Maharsha, which is the Yehuda is the exact opposite. The Yehuda is praised because you achieved the maximum compromise you could have achieved, right? And the Meshech Chochmah has a different explanation in this Gemara. He says like this: Hakavona, the intention of the Gemara is the result was entirely positive. The outcome was positive. Yard Yosef and Michal Ifneim Lahakim Shuas Ben Abasarim. With the benefit of hindsight, we can turn around and look at Yehuda's actions and say it was entirely positive. At the end of the day, it fulfilled the bris bein habasarim, and they went down to Mitzrayim, and it all had to happen that way. And Yosef has gone ahead of them to set things up so that way, the way things develop through the rest of the parashas. You always got to remember this is the longest single narrative in the whole Torah. You know that. That's very interesting. It's one narrative. Vayeshev, Miketz, Vayigash, Vayechi is the single longest narrative in the Torah. Realize that? What do I mean by narrative? It's a continuous self-contained story. There is no narrative. What I say by narrative? Because they're distinct narratives. There's a continuation. Lech Lecha and Vayera. Chayesar is already a new narrative. Do you understand? There's Vayeshev, Miketz, Vayigash, Vayechi is one continuous narrative, right? It's one continuous story that takes up 4 parashas, right? So I'm saying it's the single longest. You have to learn. You really want to understand Vayeshev. You have to, you always have to keep in mind with these 4 parashas, all 4 together, to really understand them, to get to grips with all 4 of them. It's true. So, think of it like, if you think about it, you'll understand what I mean. There's nothing else like that. You can learn Toldos. Yeah, of course, you'll make reference. Vayetze and Vayishlach go together in many ways, of course, right? And Toldos sometimes also links with Vayishlach, but it's not. Yeah. Anyway, this is one continuous piece. Yeah, that's of course. That's no. That's of course that sort of stands on its own. But apart from, it doesn't according to Chazal. But I know you know what I mean. It's just So he says like this. So the outcome was all positive. But their intention, Yehuda's intention, and the brothers agreeing to Yehuda to sell him, was intended as a negative. Okay, so the intention was wrong. The outcome was correct. But why is Yehuda criticized? He's going with Rashi in the Gemara, essentially. Why is Yehuda criticized? Because although the result was positive, the outcome, and Yosef himself says that to the brothers, I'm not going to extract retribution against you. I think it is, right? Because Hashem has orchestrated this. I'm supposed to be here so that it will set things up for you when you come. But they considered it to be negative. And therefore, says the Meshech Chochmah, Nichshal b'maaseh de Tamar. That's why Yehuda stumbled in the actions of Tamar. Shavera gereres avera. Okay? Because one sin leads to another. Because Yehuda falls into the same trap with the Yehuda and Tamar. Exactly the same thing. The end result of the episode of Yehuda and Tamar was how it was supposed to be. Right? As the Chazal say, Hashem said, "Mimeni yotzu kavushim hadvarim." These hidden things came as a result of my orchestration. Tamar knew that she was going to be the mother of the eventual royalty of Malchus based David, descended from Peretz, etc., etc. It all meant to be that way, right? But the intention was incorrect, right? She's Zona, he kisses up on her. He saw her as a Zona, she covered her face, and so and therefore, as a result, it's true that the result was V'nolad mizeh Malchi Yisrael, okay? But at the end of the day, this was something where, because it was set up in such a way that the intentions were negative, therefore to praise Yehuda is not correct. To praise Yehuda for those actions, the Gemara says, is not correct, and that's considered to be Nietz Hashem, so to speak, blaspheming. Because even if a person does something where you can turn around at the end of the day and you can say, okay, it worked out all right. It was, well, that was the way it was supposed to be. Yosef was supposed to be Mitzrayim, right? Tamar was supposed to be the mother. But at the end of the day, that doesn't justify doing the wrong thing at the beginning. You with me? And that's the critical point that Gemara is making. Again, it's a hugely important point, the way that Shechach was understanding it. That you've got to look, everyone is responsible in life. We are all responsible to look at what we do. We can't say, it's not good enough to say my intentions were correct and therefore the outcome is, my intentions were incorrect, but the outcome was okay. We've got to make sure we can justify the actions at the time we do them. It doesn't help to justify them. We often do that, but you know what I mean? To justify them retrospectively, it has to be the right thing at that time. That's what we learn from Yehuda's life. What was that?
You could thought it was right at that moment in time.
No, not according to Rashi in the Gemara. Because that's what Rashi understands, that he could have given. No, he could have sent him back.
He thought.
No, he was saying Ma betzak in If you learn simple pshat in the pasuk, right? They throw him into the pit, and he says again, the way the Targum learns, we're not going to get any monetary benefit. So it's a money thing. Let's sell him. We'll earn money. I know simple pshat. That's what the Gemara is saying, and that's why according to this, it's not positive at the time. It's a positive outcome. Joe, you had a question?
I was going to say the fact that it's much more certain that it was wrong in the Yehuda Tamar.
Yes.
Does that retrospectively firm up the fact that it was wrong?
That's a really interesting question. Meshach Chochmah doesn't seem to understand it like that, right? For the benefit of Zoom, Joe's asking, does it do we look at retrospectively? It confirms that Yehuda was sort of negative and doing the right thing at the first instance because of the second one. He says the other way around. It's Avera Gereres Avera. Yehuda falls into the trap, if you like, of doing the wrong thing in the instance of Yehuda and Tamar, with all the consequences that has for him, right, personally, and the tshuva he has to do as a result and everything else, because of the way what the actions that transpired at the beginning of the parsha. But I want to share with you two other examples of this concept, a couple of other examples of this idea of compromise from elsewhere in the parsha, which link, I think, very powerfully with these ideas. The Maril Shuleb Diskin has a Pirush on the Torah, and he says on the pasuk in the middle of going to the parsha of Yehuda and Tamar, if you understand Tamar's actions, you realize just how great she was in the way she reacts to the threat of death, and yet refuses to reveal who the father is. Right. So when it says at the end of the pasuk, at the end of that parsha, so it's Parak Lamed Ches, pasuk Chof Hey. So it says, she is being taken out. She sent to her father-in-law saying, to whoever the owner of these things are, that's who the father is. But Toma, and she said, recognize who is this ring, etc., and the things that she was given as a pledge by Yehuda, right? So he says, why is this extra word here, Vatoma? It says twice, right? The beginning, she's saying, she sent him saying, Vatoma, and she said, Hakerno. Why is that extra Vatoma? She said, it's one message, one sentence. Why is it two things, right? And he says the answer is that, and he also second question is, no, it doesn't say Vatoma twice, sorry. It says she was being taken out. She sent to her father-in-law saying, okay, yeah. And then it's about Toma again. What is the second sentence? Plus, he says, why is it that Chazal say, famously from this pasuk, that it's better for a person to throw themselves into a fiery furnace rather than embarrass someone in public? That's what we learn from this pasuk. Rashi brings it right. It's better Rashi brings this Gemara in Sota, better to risk one's life rather than embarrass someone, because that's what she's prepared to do. If it's not discovered who the father is, she would be killed, right? And she's prepared to put her life on the line rather than embarrass him. Problem is, he says, since she sent the chosom, the signet ring and everything else, she's pregnant with the man who owns these items, everyone's going to know it's him. So everyone's going to know this is Yehuda's items, so it's going to be revealed anyway. So why is it such a great thing that she's doing, that she's concealing it, right? And what does it make a difference? He says, if he says it sort of secretly, if she says it secretly or in a revealed way. And he says that you have to say like this, that she's in prison in this situation, and Yehuda doesn't want anything to do with her until she's put to death. That's what's going to happen. And they're taking her out, and she says she sends two different agents, two different shluchim, right? So that each of them will not know what the other one says, so as not to embarrass Yehuda. To the first agent, a shliach orishan, she says that he should say to Yehuda privately, to the individual in whose hand I have, right, these items, that's the father. Okay, so Yehuda, the first, in other words, the first shliach won't have the items themselves. He will just be sent to say to Yehuda, right, that your daughter-in-law has sent this message that the father is the one who owns these items. Yeah, naming the items, but not having the items, right? Right, and that shliach will not see the items at all. You understand, right? The second shliach will send the actual items, right? To say, take these items back. And the second shliach will not know what she said to the first shliach, that she's sending these back because that was the father. You understand? And in other words, and the point is, and she did that privately, and no one else would know apart from these two shluchim, right? So that no one else would know that it was in fact from Yehuda, okay? And therefore, Yehuda had the choice himself whether to admit or not, okay? And that, he says, was the Mesiras Nefesh of Tamar, okay? That she sent these items in that way, and didn't want to keep them back in such a way so that no one would realize, okay, and not to embarrass him. And that is how you read. He says you learn this pasuk. She is being taken out. She sent to her father-in-law a message without the items. Number one, a shliach saying that she's pregnant through the person who owns, and she just the description of these items. Vatomer, and then she sends a second shliach. That's the next vatomer. She sent to another shliach to take these items. Hakar no, just to give the items back. And that shliach just says, "You see these? Are these yours?" Right? And that is how she preserves it. So the reason why I think that links to the idea of compromise is that this is the exact opposite of the notion of making a compromise. You see, Tamar refuses to make a compromise. She will not compromise on that principle of malbim panei chavera b'rabba, of shaming someone in public, to the extent that she goes to these utmost lengths in a position of dire peril, even though she knows that she's risking her life, because if Yehuda does not admit, then she will be put to death, right? But to risk in any way the discovery and the shaming of Yehuda, she is not prepared to compromise that on that in any way. And that is how you can understand, I think, very powerfully very powerfully with the kind of the contrast, if you like, in a way, to Yehuda. There is a okay. Just very briefly to share with you the other example I was going to give, and that is, of course, of Yosef, right, of Yosef HaTzadik. Yeah, what does Yosef say? This is Rav Soloveitchik points this out. When he's faced with the test of the wife of Potiphar, what is the phrase that he uses? Ve'eich eseh. Well, he says, yeah, he says Ve'elotah as well, but he also says, right? His response is Pasuk Tes, Lama Tes Pasuk Tes. Einenu gadol b'bayis mimeni, v'lo chasach mimeni me'umakim esach b'asher tishtoi. Ve'eich eseh hara hagadol azos v'asi l'elokim. How can I possibly do this thing? And I will sin to Hashem. I would have sinned to Hashem, right? Rav Soloveitchik points out that for Yosef, the idea, Yosef can't even understand, if you like, the concept of tshuva, because he's at the stage where it's unthinkable. The chait, the sin, is unthinkable. It's unthinkable to act in this way, right? And Rav Soloveitchik says the following thing. He says, had Yosef not withstood the advances of the wife of Potiphar, his name would have been erased from Jewish history. It's a Gemara in Sota, completely erased. That means everything, his genius, his goodness, he says, the mercy he showed his brothers, the fact that he saved everything from destruction would not have mattered. If he wouldn't have counted for anything, if he would have compromised this moment, he would have been lost for all eternity. He would have been erased from the book, from Jewish history. And that's a very, very striking image. You know, this idea of a person can be in a position where everything rests on that moment. Will they compromise their values or not? And if they compromise themselves in that moment, it doesn't matter, because there are hundreds of other amazing things, but unfortunately that means they'll be lost, because that everything rests on that moment. It's a frightening thought, right? But the idea again of and in this way, I think it's a parallel almost, Yosef and Tamar. You know, the idea that the moment that counts, they refuse to compromise. And Yosef knows that everything rests on this moment. That's the power of that pasuk. You understand, right? If I would do this, that's it. You know, that's it. There's no possibility of recovery, and a lot, even though that's of course, it's always a path to tshuva. But the point, as the Gemara points out, is that for Yosef, it sounds like his leadership role, it wouldn't have been possible for him to be in that position. in that sense. And that is the power of this. So really, what we see from this parsha is both sides of the coin. We see the idea, as we've seen with Yehuda. Yehuda's in a position where, and we can understand Yehuda's Yehuda's actions both ways. The way Rashi and the Meshech Chochma understands it in that direction is Yehuda makes that compromise, and because he makes that compromise, he's criticized for doing so. It has a negative effect on him, because to put yourself in a position and to make a compromise is a very risky thing to do, and can have very negative consequences. And yet we see on the other side of the coin two examples: Tamar and Yosef, who refuse to make those compromises, especially when it counts. So we'll leave it there. Okay, thank you for joining, and have a very good Shabbos.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.